Oliver Cabell, the winner of the best value for the white sneaker series, sent me their SB1 boot to cut in half and see what you can get for a boot under $200. So I got a pretty crazy rest of the month. We got 8 videos coming out before the end of the month. We got the Black Friday sale coming up and the start of the duck boot series. It'll just be a mini series of the top 4 or at least 4 duck boots. Those are like the little rain boots with like a rubber toe. That starts, and so if you don't want to miss any of that, you don't want to miss the sale, be sure to subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, thanks for all your support. Now let's go over the boot information. So the brand is Oliver Cabell. The style is the SB1 boot. They come in brown like I've got, natural and black. They retail for $197. They weigh 1 pound 9 ounce, so pretty light for a boot. And they're made in Spain. Now let's go over the information that we can gather about these boots before we get them cut in half, starting with the pricing, because one of my favorite things about Oliver Cabell is they, on their website, for every single one of their products, they have a price down of each component and how much it costs, so that you can see how much it's costing them and how much they're marking them up to resell them to you, so you know you're not getting ripped off. Next thing is leather. So this is a 2mm vegetable tan leather upper. It's a pretty firm leather. It's not tumbled, or it's not really a soft leather. It's pretty stiff leather to break in. It's water resistant, and it has a pretty nice pull-up effect. And it kind of reminds me of a Chrome XL leather. It's kind of got that purple hue to it, and it has a lot of pull-up, but it's not quite as oily and not quite as flexible as a Chrome XL. Next is the lining leather. So this is a full grain vegetable tanned leather liner. It's 1mm thick, and it's tanned in Italy. Next to the construction, so on the website it says it's a Blake Stitch construction, but Blake Stitch construction don't have a welt like we see here. So I'm a little bit confused as to what the welt is for, if it's part of the construction or if it's just a faux stitch. But if you're not familiar with what a Blake stitch is, instead of having a welt on the outside that's sewn to the upper, you have the upper tucked underneath of the insole, and it's sandwiched between the insole and the midsole, and that's stitched together, and sometimes it's stitched all the way to the outsole, kind of like we see here, which is, I'm assuming, what's happening here. And I know it's a Blake stitch because if I take the insole out and feel inside, I can feel the stitching there, and I'm pretty sure that's the correct stitching. But then we got like a different color stitching here, so I'm not really sure what's going on. So I guess we'll see where you get it cut in half. Next to the stitching on the upper, and I only include this if there's something to note about it, if it's either really bad or really good. And in this case, it's really, really clean lines all throughout the upper. You know, a lot of times in these handmade and hand-sewn boots, you get a little wonky lines here and there, but these are done really, really well. The stitching is a pretty thin stitching because these aren't a work boot, you know, they're more casual or dress-oriented boot. And the only part of this boot that might have a little bit of issue with that thin stitching and the clean lines is on the lining. If you look really close at the top here and kind of throughout the lining, they cut it really, really close to the edge, but the overall stitching is beautiful. It's really well done. Now to the outsole. So this is a rubber outsole. It's made in England, and it's a rubber-based compound, and I tested the hardness, and it comes in at 83, which is pretty hard, so it's going to be a pretty long-lasting outsole. You know, if we compare it to the NYX boot that has a Vibram outsole on it, like a similar black. This comes in at 73, so it's going to be a long-lasting outsole. It's just not going to be quite as squishy as some other outsoles out there. And then moving to the heel block, so it looks like it's a full leather heel block with a rubber top lift on it. If you look down these holes, I don't see nails driven into them, so I'm assuming that this top lift is just glued on. And then moving to the inserts, so these are what looks like a thin foam rubber insert topped with the same leather that the lining's made out of. And I like how thin these are, because sometimes you get a really thick insert inside of a boot and it makes the sizing all different, but I actually like how thin this one is. And then if you look inside from there, you can see that it's a fiberboard insole. And then to what's on the inside of these boots, so it looks like there's a leather midsole, and on the site it says there's a steel shank in here, but if it's a Blake Stitch construction, there probably won't be any cork in here because there's no void caused by that rib that goes around the bottom of the insole that the welt is stitched to, so I'm not sure what else is inside of here. And then finally to the fit, feel, and sizing. So I actually really like the look of these boots. They balance the look of the toe cap style boot. It has a tendency to kind of look a little more work oriented, but it has that nice slim silhouette with a non-chunky outsole. They also balance that same thing with how they wear, because when they're actually on your feet, they're not super narrow so your toes aren't squished, but they also don't have a super wide toe box. They don't have a super wide looking toe box so that they look like clown shoes. They balance that really well. As for breaking these in, they are really, really stiff when you first get them. After a couple hours of wearing them, you start wearing in that leather and it starts breaking in, but it definitely is a little bit of a break-in process. It's not too uncomfortable underfoot because you've got this insert, and so if you get a pair of these, just keep in mind you might not be able to wear them for the full day right out of the gate. And as for sizing, I would say it's pretty true to what they say on the site right here. I'm a 10.5 in regular shoes, and I went with the 10 because I have more narrow feet and they fit me perfectly. And that's pretty much everything. So now let's cut these boots in half, and thanks to Oliver Cabell for sponsoring this video. You can use the code ROSEBOOTS at checkout to get some free conditioner with your order, and check them out via the link in my description. So let's cut them in half. Okay, we got them cut in half. Let's see what's inside. So a lot of interesting things going on inside of this boot. So let's go through the layers and identify what they are and kind of talk about some of the unique things to this boot that I've never seen before. So starting with the outsole, we got that rubber outsole, and this logo, from having a laser engraver, I can tell this is laser engraved. Then above that, or I guess with the heel block, we can see now it's a full leather heel block with that rubber top lift. And then to the leather midsole, it's about 4 millimeters thick. And above that, in the heel area, we've got a layer of compressed cardboard with the shank sandwiched in between the cardboard and the fiberboard insole. And then above that, obviously the fiberboard insole, and then you can see a little Blake stitch right there, the toe. And then up from there, we've got the flesh out counter cover. That's just a flesh out version of the lining leather, then the lining leather and the upper leather. And if we look at the counter is also a compressed cardboard. The toe stiffener, or the toe counter, looks like it's some sort of thermoplastic. Then you can see there is a little bit of a filler layer in between the insole and the midsole, and that's, I think, more than anything, just a squeak pad to add a little bit of a friction layer that as these boots wear in, you don't have those two layers rubbing against each other and causing a lot of squeak, and it will add a little bit of initial comfort. Now let's answer some of the questions I had about the stitching and the welt and everything. So I've got this one cut in half, and then I also have torn one a little bit to shreds to kind of show visually the different aspects of this boot to answer some of those questions. So let's start with the most important question: what's going on with this welt? So if you look here, the welt isn't actually stitched to anything. It's just a decorative welt. It doesn't add anything to the structure, and it doesn't really go anywhere because the stitch is literally just stitched to itself. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a little decorative part of the boot to make it look more boot-like. And they're pretty open about it being a Blake stitch construction, so I wouldn't be concerned about that at all. You know, we've seen a lot of fake stitches before, with Thorogoods, Solavairs, and both of those companies are pretty reputable and long-lasting boots. Now to the Blake stitch and just the overall construction. So now you can see how the Blake stitch is this stitch right here on the inside that sews the insole down through the upper that's rolled underneath, through the midsole, all the way to the outsole that's channeled into the rubber outsole there. There's a lot of pros and cons associated with Blake stitch versus Goodyear welt versus stitch down. And maybe I think I'll do a video one day kind of going through all the pros and cons. But one definite pro of having a Blake stitch construction is they're a little bit faster and easier to make, so you can get a boot that's a little bit more affordable, and hopefully the money the company saves will be put in higher quality materials or whatever else they're trying to upgrade in the boot. But what's interesting about this Blake stitch is it stops at the arch of your foot, and then it goes to basically a cemented construction, because the area from the heel to where the Blake stitch ends is just glued down right there. So some people aren't gonna like that, but this boot does have a shank, so you're not gonna have a ton of flexing in there where you're gonna have a lot of issues with it. And if this was a work boot, it might be something I would hate on. But because it's a $200 and under boot, and it's a casual boot, I don't think it's too big of a deal. And then moving to the heel, we've got kind of a nail down construction. So you can see there's little teeny nails that nail the upper that's wrapped underneath the insole to the insole, and with their little clinch nails. So when they're making this boot, they put it on an anvil, and those nails are driven through, they hit the metal anvil and curl, or it's probably actually a last that has a metal plate on it that is basically an anvil. And those nails curl and clinch over and make it so that this insole is not just going to pop off. It would have to actually pull through the nail. And then from there, the entire upper and insole is nailed to the heel block and midsole and outsole with those big nails that are driven all the way through the heel block. And now we can see that I've got this top lift pulled off. There aren't any nails that go upwards from the ground up through the heel block. This is just glued on. Usually in a higher quality boot or a work boot like with this NYX boot, you can see that this big nail is driven through the top lift or the outsole on the heel up through all the layers and then clinched over. So this is the superior way to do it. It's probably a little bit longer lasting. But that being said, I did have to take my channel locks of this to really pry it apart, so I wouldn't be too concerned about it, but it is worth noting. So now that we've got it all torn apart and understand how it's all built, let's go through the pros and cons, starting with the cons. So first con, as you can see, there's a lot of man-made materials in here. There's a lot of cardboard and the fiberboard and some foam in here. Usually for this price range of boot, you're going to see some man-made or synthetic materials, but it is a con in a way that these do wear out a little bit quicker and make it a little bit harder to resole, because this fiberboard and cardboard has a tendency to split where leather won't because of its internal fiber structure. The overall construction isn't the greatest construction. You know, if you were planning on doing any work or any hiking in this boot, you'd have an issue with this construction. But for a casual boot, it's not too bad, and it's pretty common construction type for this price range of boot. And you can find boots that have all these problems fixed, but you're going to be spending $100 to $150 more, and some people aren't going to want to spend that extra money just for a casual boot that they're going to wear a few times a week. So that brings us to the pros. So the first pro is, and probably the most important one, is the price of this boot. So this boot is a $200 under boot with a full grain vegetable tan leather upper. It's fully lined, and all the components that matter are built out of higher quality materials, because you've got a pretty thick leather upper at 2 millimeters. It's fully leather lined. You've got a full grain vegetable tan leather midsole, and then a full leather heel stack. You know, we didn't even see a full leather heel stack in the RM Williams at $500. So overall, I think this is a really good boot for the price. Obviously, there's some things that could be fixed in this boot that would raise the price of the boot. And some companies are trying to make a boot to fit a certain budget, but still have the components that really matter, have those be high quality, and make it more affordable on some of the components that don't matter quite as much. And I think that's exactly what this boot has done. And I think that's why, even with the white sneaker finale, why I chose Oliver Cabell as the best value, because they do really good at balancing an affordable boot or shoe and cutting the corners that they need to, but maintaining the overall quality and longevity of the boot. And I think that's what this boot's done too. So let me know what you guys think. And if you own a pair of these, let me know your experience with them, because I like going to the comment section and reading from people who've owned these boots. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, because it makes a huge difference. I'm trying to get to that 300,000 subscriber mark so we can give away some boots to you guys and some homeless. And we got some pretty crazy videos coming up. We got the Start of the Duck boots mini series. We've got a really crazy boot that, if you thought the New Rock boots are crazy. Wait till you see this boot. And Black Friday's coming up. So I'm also gonna do a little preview video. So thanks for everything you do. See ya.